The time is now 7:01 a.m. We will now call this special public meeting of the Board of Trustees of Humble Independent School District to order. Moving to our first item of business, closed session. The time is now 7:02. We will enter into closed. The time is now 8:04 a.m. We will now reconvene into open session. Our first item is public comment. Seeing that no one has signed up to address the board, we will move on to action items from closed session. Item 4A, personnel recommendations. Mr. Holmes, do I have a motion?
I move that the board approve the administration's personnel recommendation as presented in closed session with addendum.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion is seconded by Mr. Scarfo. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries 6-1. Item 4B, consider and take possible action regarding employment and duties of an acting superintendent. Mr. Holmes, do I have a motion?
I move that the board approve employment terms for the acting superintendent as discussed in closed meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
The motion was seconded by Mr. Scarfo. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 6-1. On both, it was Mr. Sitton. So moving on to item 5A, our consent agenda, approval of goods, services, and professional non-construction services exceeding $50,000 in the aggregate and $25,000 individually. Do I have a motion on the consent agenda? Mr. Holmes.
Yes, approval of goods, professional services, and non-construction services exceeding $50,000 in the aggregate or $25,000 individually.
Do I have a second? Any discussion? All those in favor? Who seconded?
I didn't hear anybody. I'll second it.
Scarfo will second it.
Do it again.
Second.
It's not working? You
No,
have
it's
to turn it
working.
on?
Yeah, you have to turn it
You
on.
can't hear yourself, though.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Can y'all hear us back there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. There's a second by Mr. Scarfo. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? No. Motion carries 6-0. 7-0. Mr. Mr. Kirchhoffer?
I don't want to have to go back into closed. What if it included salary? We're going to say the amount.
I was about to ask Mr. Rush. Mr. Rush, can you hear me?
What if it's in this motion?
And the word immediately.
We've already voted on the
And the word
motion,
immediately. And the
Word
word.
immediately, right.
We need to put them both in.
What was in the motion?
It's that, but there was a revision.
Mr.
was a
Holmes,
revision.
were you provided a different
revision.
motion yesterday?
I was.
Okay, so we need to go back and, Mr. Rush, we need to go back to the personnel recommendations because I believe that there was an employee mentioned by name, and I believe that there was another motion that was not read. So,
Yeah, two words
Yes.
are missing out of the motion.
That's it. That's it.
So, yes, yeah.
The amount and the immediately.
That's correct.
So where is Mr.
So, Mr. Rush, Attorney Rush, how do we go back and add that to 4 B, and 4A.
Ask him to unmute.
Call a cell phone.
Yeah. Anybody viewing this right now, we're having some technical difficulties with the attorney joining us via Zoom. So everybody knows how fun Zoom can be. It's great when it works, but sometimes it is a little bit problematic. And so that is what is going on right now. So we're trying to get the attorney back on so that we can ask a legal question. So bear with us.
We can vote to amend.
Hey, check out that chat.
Yeah, what's in the chat?
You said I'm not getting sound on my end. It could be a.
Can you call him, Chris, and put him on speaker?
Put him on speaker.
Okay. I think it's going to have feedback if I do that. I'm going to go ahead and call him, but I think it's going to have feedback if I do it that way, audience. So bear with me, and I'm so sorry.
Chris, it's not live. We're not live.
Okay.
So there's no public.
But is it recorded?
Yes.
Yeah, it's recorded, not true.
Oh, you've got it now. So you would have to, as a point of order, amend motion 4A that has already been approved.
And 4B. And Chris, we were gonna say it, but there was no discussion, like, you're going fast.
Mr. President Parker, he's got the correct language now. So I believe
Is your microphone on?
it's not. I believe in order to do this correctly, he would announce an amended motion that has already been voted on with the correct language. And then we would second that and revote.
Is Corey, Mr. Rush? Because my phone won't work.
Yeah,
like
because
it
at the
won't
end of the
allow
day,
me.
we've already approved what he's going to read. He's just going to add some language to it. So it's not, we're not changing the vote. We're adding a little more specifics to what was voted on.
Correct.
And when that comes up, if I could, since we didn't have any discussion, explain my vote on those two issues.
That's fine.
Madam Chairman, I make a motion to amend the approved.
I would like to talk to Mr. Rush first.
Yeah, if we put you on speaker, Mr. Parker has a question. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear y'all better. So I'm hearing my phone. I can't open my computer.
Okay, so when we voted on item 4B, the motion that was written was not read. And so we already voted, and it passed, but the motion that was written was not read. So we need, how do we go back, since it's already been voted upon?
Somebody from the majority side of the original vote would need to have a motion to reconsider the earlier action item.
Okay, so can I get a motion to reconsider item 4B?
4A and 4B.
4A and 4B.
Madam Chairman, I make a motion to reconsider items 4A and 4B that were already approved and voted on.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Sitton. All right, Mr. Holmes.
Vote on that first?
Oh, yes. Mr.
said you-
Mr.
You would need
Rush.
to, you would need to take a vote on the original motion as it was, because you're reconsidering that motion. Assuming that motion were to fail, then a new motion, such as the one that Mr. Holmes has prepared, can be read for that item. But the original motion has to fail first.
Okay, so do we need to make a motion to reconsider, vote on that, reread the original motion, vote on that, and then we can have the new motion? Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Okay, so, motion to reconsider, all those in favor? Okay, passes 7-0. Okay, then reread the original motion.
Sure. Madam Chairman, I make a motion. That's right.
Got to read the original,
The original one.
and then that has to be voted down before we go to reconsider.
Yeah, the one that y'all voted on already needs to be
Got it. Got
reread.
it. I move that the board approve the administration's personnel recommendations as presented in closed session with addendum.
All those, seconded by Ms. Lamont Dixon. All those in favor? Opposed? Item fails 7-0. So, Mr. Holmes, do I have a new motion?
Yes, motion to approve the administration's personnel recommendations, including the employment of Mr. Jeremy Binkley as general counsel, as presented in closed session with addendum.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Scarfo. Any discussion?
Yes, please. The reason I'm voting in the manner that I am is not because these are not quality individuals, but as I've asked, I would like to see expectations and accountability before I approve a position of this nature.
Mr. Rush, is that, there were two,
The other name was not on there.
Mr. Clark, it's in the addendum. The item. It's in the personnel addendum.
right. Is that an acceptable motion to cover the addendum? Or is that just for that one individual?
You want him to reread it?
Yes.
Sure. 4A.
4A would be, I don't know if y'all were asking me, I can
No,
break it up a little bit.
Yeah, he's
But
okay.
4A is for general counsel and other personnel recommendations as presented in closed session.
Okay,
Right.
thank you for the
General counsel
clarification.
specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
All those in favor? Opposed? Item passes 6-1.
All right, Madam Chairman, I make a motion to reconsider item 4B that was approved and voted on.
Second.
All those in favor? Okay, that motion passes 7-0. Can you reread the original motion, Mr. Holmes?
Yes, I move that the board approve employment terms for the acting superintendent as discussed in closed meeting.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Ms. Lamont Dixon seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Item fails 7-0. Mr. Holmes, can I get a motion on item 4, on item 2B?
4B, Madam Chair?
4B.
Yeah, 4B.
Yes, ma'am. Motion to approve payment of a monthly stipend to Dr. Roger Brown for acting superintendent duties in the amount of $11,831 effective immediately.
Can I get a second?
Second.
So, Mr. Grabowski seconds. Is there any discussion?
I have point of order. I think you have to state how frequent the 11,000 would be.
You said monthly.
I didn't hear you say monthly.
Yes, ma'am. Monthly.
Okay.
It says it in the motion.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you. My apologies.
All right, the item has been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Yes, again, as I mentioned on the previous item, I'm going to vote accordingly because of the lack of expectations and accountability in writing.
Anybody further? All those in favor? Opposed? Item passes 6-1.
Do you need Mr. Rush any longer?
I do
My
not.
arm's getting tired.
I don't need Mr. Rush any longer.
Mr. Rush,
Yes, sir.
I'm going to disconnect and I don't
All right.
believe.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Moving on to information items, we will have a presentation on the review of the Texas Accountability System and student performance.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. I'd like to see everyone here. Thank you for being here so early this morning. We appreciate it. We are going to give you an overview of our accountability system. I think it's important and worked with the team on, I'd like to provide a foundation because I know there's been a lot of discussion about student performance throughout the state, plus Humboldt ISD student performance and accountability. And so let's talk about that. And so in just a minute, Dr. Wilson Rogers is going to come up and walk through a presentation that she did with elementary principals and secondary principals at the beginning of the year. And I sat through the elementary one and I thought, well, that'd be really good for our first breakfast with the board, I think, to give everybody a foundation, because I know throughout the year we're going to have discussions regarding our student performance and accountability. And let me see. Okay, I am pressing the. Did I do something? So as we get this working, so this next slide really is just talking about, and I'm going to move through it because of time. We all know accountability is important. There it is. Perception of the public. You know, I think about it when the state went to rating schools A through F and districts A through F. We all went through school and we know what A means, we know what B means, and so on. And so the guy sitting at the coffee shop in the morning opens up the paper, and there's all of our student performance scores throughout the Houston area, maybe even through the state of Texas. And he's just reading that. And he knows what an A means, and he knows what a B means, and so forth. And so that was to give clarity for that individual. But there's a lot that goes into that A, B, C, D, or F rating. But it's important. I went at the beginning of the year to a realtor meeting, and they had superintendents, I don't know, 5 or 6 of us there. Yeah, you were there, Ms. Lavon Dixon. And so they're really interested in that and our ratings and our accountability, because it's important, because we all know when people are looking to move to an area or to stay in an area, the school's the foundation. And so they look at that. And so those scores are important. Student growth is important to our parents. It's also balancing state testing, because we talk about this, balancing the testing along with all the other things we do. So one of the things that we talked about with the principals this year is STAR isn't everything, but it's something. Meaning, we do a lot in our school district to serve kids, but STAR is important as well, and their achievement on that individual assessment, because that's what the state has set up to look at individual schools and school districts. So we know it's important, and so we need to focus on that. So one of the other things we have to do is we have to provide this information to you as a board by September 30th. And so we want to make sure we meet that deadline. And so I think you're going to enjoy today's presentation by Dr. Wilson Rogers. There she is. But I want everyone to know that we understand that our STAR scores need to improve. Everyone here that you see in this room works on this on a daily basis with our school district and with our teachers and our principals out there. They all know it's a focus. They all know we need to improve. So you'll see things later, and we'll go through, and Dr. Wilson Rogers will go through your folder with you. We know we have things to work on. So let's just get that out up front. We know that. And this team back here that you see, they're focused. They're zeroed in on that this year and with the principals. And so we realize that because it's important. It is one indicator of what people think of our school district. And you've seen a lot. Dallas has been out there. Houston's been out there bragging about they've increased and they're doing better. We understand that. So we know we need to focus on that. So I want you to have a foundation. So how does that all work? And then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Good morning, Ms. Parker, members of the board. As Dr. Brown shared, you have a folder in front of you that has a copy of this presentation. Right behind that copy of the presentation is our STAR performance data by campus, by content, by grade level for STAR and EOC. By the calendar events produced by TEA, we have to provide that to our local board by September 30th. So our time this morning, we do want to review the accountability system. We want to talk about our campus accountability scores, talk to you about our campus accountability plans that we're doing with our campuses that actually started last year and we're continuing with even more focus this year, and then talk a little bit about our teaching and learning campus support. So starting with the accountability system, the system really has a three-part system. Domain 1 is your student achievement scores. Domain 2 is school progress. And Domain 3 is closing the gaps. Whichever one is higher, Domain 1 or Domain 2, that is 70% of your score. Domain 3, closing the gaps, is 30%. So let's take one domain at a time, starting with Domain 1. For our elementary and middle schools, Domain 1 is 100% STAR scores. For high school, it looks a little bit different. For high school, STAR scores is 40% of the domain. Graduation rate is 20% of the domain. And CCMR, college, career, and military readiness, is 40% of the domain. So looking at Humble ISD STAR performance, this is all of our assessments together. This is a data table that came straight from TEA. So even though we did not get accountability ratings, we did get all the data behind the ratings. So from the data table from TEA, you can see that our component score would be a 47. Well, that component score comes from taking our approaches, meets, and masters numbers, adding them up and dividing it by 3. Now, this is inclusive of 3rd through 8th grade as well as EOC, reading, math, science, and social studies assessments. Know that as I've talked to all campuses, we've talked to principals, we've talked to assistant principals, we've talked to instructional coaches, we've even gone out and started to do individual meetings on teams. Know that as it relates to Domain 1 with STAR, our mantra is we need to increase our meets and masters. Truthfully and honestly, the cliche that I use with them is I want more M&Ms than apples. I want more meets and masters than approaches. And we can see truthfully and honestly that we have 75% of our students at the currently scoring at approaches level with all of our assessments, but we want to increase our performance in our meets level and masters level performance. As it relates to the state in comparison to STAR performance, state is, and we are right there neck and neck. 75% for approaches, 48 and 48 for meets, and 20% is at masters for the state, and Humble ISD is at 19%. Now remember, that's for elementary and middle, that's the only component for Domain 1. When it comes to high school, we also have to look at graduation rate and CCMR. So when you look at graduation rate for Domain 1, you get the highest out of your 4-year, 5-year, and 6-year rate. When you look at Humble ISD, our highest is our 6-year rate at 97.1. And then when you put that in comparison to the state, you can see that where the state falls in as well, the state highest for Domain 1 is the 6-year rate. Now that's going to be different in Domain 1 than it is in Domain 3. Domain 1 you can get from 4, 5, or 6, but in Domain 3 you only get the federal 4-year rate that is part of the CCMR, it's part of graduation rate. Longitudinally over time, I wanted you also to be able to see our CCMR performance. Know that there's many indicators, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, about how you can get CCMR. There's college readiness, there's career readiness, and then there's military readiness. We are actually going in the right trajectory when it comes to CCMR. We took a little bit of a hit as we went from class of 2019 to class of 2020, but you can see we're starting to go back in a positive trajectory. Some things to note, that there's many things about CCMR that has changed over time. as it relates to career and technical education, as it relates to our special education indicators, know that it continues to change, even for next year, because it's a part about cohort, and know that CCMR and graduation rate are lagging data. So even though we're looking at Accountability 2024, as you can see up here, we're talking about the class of 2023. Same thing with graduation rate. You see that's a 4-year, a 5-year, and a 6-year. Yes, sir, Mr. Scarfo.
Yeah, I look at these charts here, and you said, oh, we're going in the right direction. I mean, except for a couple of those different measures, whether it's college, career, or military, I mean, they're flat at best. I mean, we're
Correct.
kind of just
Correct.
treading water.
Correct.
Which,
So when you look at our overall percentages of what we're doing, you can see we're going. But as you look down in the indicators, you're going to see that some things are increasing, some things are flatlined, some things are decreasing. And know that as the criteria changes, as the indicator changes, as our student populations change, there's different things that impact that. So we know that with our CTE department and our guidance and counseling department, we're definitely digging into this data and having much conversations with our high schools and associate principals of instruction about what's the right pathway, what's appropriate for every kid individually.
because I mean, this is one area that's really pulling down the total, because your next slide
Correct.
shows that. I mean,
Correct.
we're really,
Correct.
So-
CCMR is 40%, right, of domain
right,
one.
that's what I'm saying, it's really kind of sucking down the whole thing,
So this
too.
is, no leaf can get unturned, right? We got to look at everything because it's all part of the bigger pie. So collectively, it's 100% for domain one for high school, but CCMR alone is 40%. So then within that, you have to say, what are all these pieces that go into CCMR, and what do we need to take more deeper dives into the data to see what may be causing the areas of concern? So as you can see, as a state, the state's at 76%, and our district is at 61%. So talking about those indicators, as I shared earlier, we have a college side of college, career, and military readiness, and a career side and a military side. So when you think about college readiness, things that factor into that, and know that some of these, you have to put pieces together, right? So you have AP exams, you have to get a 3 or higher. IB exams, you have to get a 4 or higher. TSI 2, you have criteria for mathematics, you have criteria for ELA. SAT, the same thing. ACT, and no ACT standards changed this year. College prep courses in math for ELA, you have dual credit, you have on-ramps, and also earning an associate's degree. When I say putting some things together, so I could get a score from ACT reading that can go with SAT math. But I have to meet both the English part and the math part. Yes, sir.
So, remind me, we pay for every high school student to take the SAT and the ACT, or one or the other, is that right?
I'll let Ms. Melissa Lee answer that question.
PSAT?
Good morning, everybody. We currently pay for all of our high school students to take the ACT during their junior year, and we have an opt-in option for them if they want to take the SAT as well as the NMSQT.
Now, I would be curious, because when we're looking at things like this, we're comparing ourselves to every school and every district in the state. Not every district in the state is allocating funds for every student to take the ACT or SAT. So when you look at numbers, just the gross numbers, that could move the needle up or down, correct?
As far as the passing standards,
Yeah.
when you're comparing to others, correct, that would, because if
So
not
we're
everybody's
we're not
testing
necessarily
everybody.
comparing apples and apples in that sense.
On that one, correct, right, not
Okay.
on that state testing, correct, or college testing.
Yes, sir.
So, can we look at districts of our size similar, let's say a plus or minus 10,000 or 15,000, right? Because the gap, why is there such a gap? I mean, 15%, that's a pretty wide variance. I understand exactly where Mr. Sitton is coming from. Can we get some comparable sample sizes of districts of our size that pay for SAT and all of those things, so we can get a better read on where we stand? Because again, perception is reality, and until you manage that reality, it's it is what it is, right? So just if we could do that, I don't even know if you have it, but.
Yeah, I do
Sounds
think,
like
I
it.
do think after Dr. Wilson Rogers gets done with the presentation today, we have some things that we have already put in place last school years in regards to all things CCMR, the indicators that she's going through here. Some things that we are putting in place this year, and then some things we're going to do in the years moving forward. But I do think that's something, if you want more information, we can probably look at giving into you in more detail per whatever Dr. Brown would like to schedule that for us. We'd be happy to do a deeper dive into CCMR as a whole. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and for the record, I think it's fantastic that we pay for every student to take these tests, because they need to take that test, see where they land, you know. But we also know that most colleges, it's optional at this point. So to have, again, for the public's information, to have that as an indicator, twofold. One, most colleges, it's optional, and two, most school districts don't pay for everyone to do it, so their numbers are skewed as well.
Right, absolutely.
So is those criteria there for the AP exam, that would be reflected in your chart with all those things? So only, like, for instance, 23% met the criterion, and now it's down to 22% who met the criterion for the AP. Am I following? Is that what's
Yes.
just tracking, right, what you're showing here? Okay. So we're not, okay, going.
Well, and the other thing to keep in mind when it comes to the AP exams is a student can take an AP class and elect to not take the
right,
AP exam as well. So that is another indicator to consider as
Sure.
well.
And if you're going to look at, I don't think it's just size of the school. You really have to get a demographic comparison too, you know, to make it apples to apples. I mean, because there are a lot of kids not taking, even though it's offered to them, are they not taking it? So they're not in that number anyway. And, you know, I don't know how much that skews it, but I would think, though, if you're going to compare us to other districts, it should be based on the demographics of a district.
We can
And
definitely put that
kinda
together for you.
match better that way than just raw number, you know. Just because somebody's got 50,000 students or 48,000 students isn't necessarily comparable. So-
Right, absolutely. Yes, Ms. Lamont Dixon?
Can we go back to the next slide? Go to the next, well, I found that one. The one with the CCMR indicators, yeah. So one thing I wanted to also say is some of your top students don't fall sometimes in these categories. I'm just gonna give you an example of one. My daughter, who's a senior in college, you know, a lot of top private schools, and the school she went to is like a 4% acceptance rate. They don't accept dual credit. You know, there's a lot of things that they don't do. It's test optional. So, yes, she took AP courses, but since they weren't gonna take any of the classes, I didn't encourage her to take the AP exam. So in a way, here's this top kid who's graduating, you know, very near the top of her class, about to graduate college, magna cum laude. She's definitely college, career, military ready from Humble ISD. But this is not a good measure for a student like her. And I'll just say, I have 4 kids, and I did not encourage any of them in that same way because they weren't, you know, and I love Texas A&M, I know a lot of whoops in the house, and I went to Auburn, so I can appreciate that. But my kids, 3 of them went to private schools that don't necessarily take this. So one thing that I always find challenging, and I'm pretty sure Mike Morath will be in San Antonio when we get there, Mr. Holmes. He's usually there, and I usually sit down and speak with him for a little bit, so I'll make sure I share that with him too. Even the university he went to would not look at these necessarily as indicators. So, you know, I just always want us to remember that Humble ISD is doing an excellent job. Yes, we do need to raise those numbers, like Dr. Brown said earlier, because it's also about public perception. But some of our brightest students, they may not fall in line with all of these, right? So sometimes it's skewed, and we're not even tracking that kid, right? We're not tracking Sydney Dixon to see how she's doing now in college, right? So it's I don't know, it's unnerving sometimes. That's all I wanted to say. Yes.
And I will say that is, you're right, for this is the college readiness. Dr. Wilson-Rogers, could you go to the next slide real quick? So we also do look at the career readiness and military readiness for this as well. But to Ms. Lamont Dixon's point, these are Texas CCMR indicators. So that is what we're primarily looking at, is how we're meeting the Texas standards for our kids that are staying here in Texas as well. And we would love to present more information to you on that. I want to make sure we have time to get through the full accountability system, but we'll work with Dr. Brown on scheduling something specific for CCMR and what we're doing to move that needle forward. Okay, thank you.
So when you talk about career readiness and military readiness, you're going to see underneath career readiness how we have things based on class of 2025 and class of 2026. As I stated earlier, you see that the indicators change a little bit. So what our criteria for 2025 is not the same set of criteria for 2026, because now we have to earn an IBC plus 2 courses for class of 2025, but for class of 2026, you have to do IBC plus 3 courses in your aligned program of study and at least 1 level 3 or 4. So every year it changes a little bit, but that's what the state has given us as the indicators, and we're trying to do our best to ensure that our students can get those. You have level 1 and level 2 certifications. Special education is with IEPs and workforce readiness, or they graduate with an advanced diploma plan. And now military readiness has not been part of accountability for a couple years, and it's back. We now have to get DD4 forms from our students, and that's a process that we've had to help our campuses put systems in place to gather that information from kids and be able to load it to the system for TEA documentation. So Domain 2 actually has 2 pieces. You have a Part 2A and a Part 2B, starting with Part 2A, which is student growth. And with student growth, we're really comparing reading and math performance from one year to the next, looking at did the student grow a performance level from one year to the next. So as you can see in front of you, this is the table that comes from TEA that takes all of our testers and shows where were they the previous year in comparison to where they were for the next year. So this is looking at 4th and 5th grade reading and math, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade reading and math, English 8th grade math to Algebra 1, 8th grade reading to English 1, and English 1 to English 2. And as you look at this, if you look at this top row where you see low did not meets and you go across, you're going to see that we had 2,160 kids who scored at that performance level the previous year and stayed at that performance level, which therefore they did not give us a point towards Domain 2A. Then we had 1,415 students who went from low did not meet to high did not meet. Now, in terms of passing the assessment, the students didn't necessarily pass at the performance level that TEA counts for passing, which is approaches, but they did grow. So they gave us a point. So we got 1,415 points. Then we had students who went from low did not meet to low approaches, 616 of them, who now went from not passing the assessment the previous year to now passing at the low approaches level. 253 went from low did not meet to high approaches. 85 went from low did not meet to meets. And we actually had 7 students who went from low did not meet to masters. So they literally jumped 2 performance levels.
So, Dr. Wilson-Rogers, so those are numbers, but there's kids behind those numbers. So individually, how does that get to the principals and the school staff that they know who those students are?
So we actually have our data management system, Eduphoria, allows us to run data templates for growth charts that allows us to take our state assessment data, put into that system, and then those growth charts gets down to not only student level, but also teacher level. So we can say, Dr. Brown's class, these are the students that he had for testing. These are how those students perform from the previous year to the next year. We also can look at that by student groups. We can look at it by EcoDis, special education, EcoDis. And we've trained our principals and instructional coaches and sent out information to them to be able to look at that information by that so that they can know where kids are and where we would want them to go. We also like to look at our highest level of performance too, because we don't want any regression. We don't want any student to be with us and regress from one year to the next year. So you do the same process, and I tell everyone I kind of start from the opposite end when I go and do it now with masters. I start and see that we had 5,281 students who were master students and stayed masters. That's a hard feat to stay high. But then we also can see that we do have a kid who regressed all the way backwards. So as a campus, and as me and my team are going out and having campus accountability plan meetings, we're asking, do you know who that student is? Is that student still with you? Whose classroom is that student in? Has someone had a conversation with that student? Because every kid deserves to grow. Part 2B, really now is relative performance. And this is now looking at our economically disadvantaged percentage as it relates to our Domain 1 score. And this is now when TEA gets real mathy on us. We start to plot all of our performances on our coordinate plane, looking at the percent of eco-dis as it relates to our Domain 1 score. They find a line of regression. They apply a quadratic formula. And on top of that, then they decide what's going to be the range for A, B, C, D, and F, but as it relates to your economically disadvantaged percentage. So there's like 15 pages of tables because you end up putting each economically disadvantaged percentage starting from 0% to 100%, and then looking at looking at Domain 1 performance. And as you can see, as you walk this Cartesian plane, you can see that the smaller your economically disadvantaged percentage, the smaller your window is to get an A. The larger your economically disadvantaged percentage is, the larger your opportunity is to get an A. And they figure out where you are, and wherever band you fall into, that's where you end up getting. And that's a part of TEA's manual that's released. Actually, we got a manual this year for 3 years out, and you can see these charts inside of it. Because we don't have official ratings, how you saw this A, B, C, D, and F, the state hasn't provided that for us at this time. All we have is where do we fall on the Cartesian plane. So we know that for Humboldt ISD, our economically disadvantaged percentage is 51.3%, and as it relates to STAR, our component score was a 47. Now, we don't know if that equates to an A, B, C, D, or F. Again, our economically disadvantaged percentage is 51.3%, and as it relates to CCMR, our component score was a 61. The state hasn't released to us if that's a B, C, D, or F. Now, when it comes to this one, remember I originally said Domain 1 or Domain 2 is 70% of your score. But you first have to figure out, is Domain 2 higher, is Domain 1 higher? But guess what? 2A and 2B, whichever one is the better, it becomes your Domain 2 score. So if growth is higher, if growth's a 90 and relative performance is a 72, you're going to get that 90. Then you have to say, now, is my 90 for Domain 2 higher than what it is for Domain 1? And then that becomes 70%. So we almost got to do the best of twice. You got to do the best of first within Domain 2, then you have to do the best of as it relates to Domain 1 to Domain 2, and that becomes 70% of your score. Yes, sir.
Question, when is the grading released? Because I know you said it hadn't been released yet, right?
It won't be released until the hearings are completed and the judge. So remember, we're still, ratings for 2023 haven't been released. Ratings for 2024 haven't been released because of the hearings.
But you have our ratings right here.
I'm going to tell you how I got those in a second.
All right. So, all right.
Okay. Domain 3 is closing the gaps, which if you are confused from Domain 1 and 2, this is going to add a whole nother layer to the madness. So with Domain 3, what is measured? STAR performance at meets or above. That's for elementary, middle, and high. Student growth, reading and math. That's for elementary and middle. Graduation rate is high school. TELPAS is one of our state assessments that measures our performance for our emergent bilingual students, looking at speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And we look at, did they grow in 3 out of those 4 domains? That's TELPAS, and that's for elementary, middle, and high. Domain 1, elementary and middle school, we're back looking at it, but by student groups. And then CCMR is for high schools. Now, nothing can be simple, right? So we have state accountability criteria for Domain 3, and we have federal criteria for Domain 3. So when you're looking at state criteria, the state looks at 4 student groups. That's our all student groups, our 2 lowest performing ethnicity groups per campus, and then our high focus group. We know the state gives to us every campus's 2 lowest performance student groups. We make that information available to our campuses so that they know. For most of our campuses in Humble ISD, that's African American and Hispanic. We do have some with white, we do have some with Asian, but the majority of our campuses, that's African American and Hispanic, is their 2 lowest performing student groups as it relates to state accountability. High focus groups. In the past, high focus group, we used to say a student count 6 times or count 7 times because they could count for all. They would count for their ethnicity. Then they would count for SPED and emergent bilingual, and they would count for continuously enrolled and non-continuously enrolled and ECODIS. So kids could count multiple times for the state. Well, in state accountability now, they've taken and put in many of those in the high focus group, which is your special education, your emergent bilingual, your ECODIS, your homeless, and your mobile. All of those are now part of a high focus group. So if you're in that group, doesn't matter how many times, you're only going to count 1 time in that group. So the most a student can count in the state accountability is for all, their ethnicity, and the high focus group. Now, federal accountability is different. Federal accountability looks at all of these groups individually. So as the state is only looking at 4, federal is looking at 12. For all of those things I talked about measured before, but for each one of these groups. Another thing that has changed for accountability for Domain 3, in the past, it was either you met the target for those individual components and groups, or you didn't meet the target. Now is a gradated scale of a 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So, in layman's terms, a 0 is you didn't meet the target and you went backwards from your performance the year before. A 1 is you didn't meet the target and you made minimal growth from the year before. A 2 is you didn't meet the target, but you made expected growth from the year before, and you're going to see there's formulas up there. A 3 is you did meet the target, and a 4 is you met the long-term target. And that long-term target goes to year 2037, 38. So when campuses are looking at their Domain 3 reports right now, they're seeing 0s, 1s, and 2s where they used to see yeses and nos. Then you have to go and say, okay, what was the target and what was my performance, and do some understanding of 0, 1, 2, 3s, and 4s. So we're going on and having individual conversations and helping campuses really navigate that, because then that ends up helping them figure out what student groups are causing us some concerns on our campus. Who are those kids, and what kind of progress monitoring measures do we need to put in place to ensure that those groups don't continue to have low achievement and performance? Yes, sir.
That number 2 is a little confusing. Is a little confusing to me. So how would you don't meet the current interim target, but showed expected growth towards the next interim target? How do they arrive at that? That to me seems kind of
So I almost
counterintuitive.
feel like I need to be a teacher at a board, Mr. Scarfo. But say the interim target is a 37. In 2023, I had a 19. In 2024, I have a 34. I didn't meet the interim target, but I showed growth from the previous year. That's going to be a 2. So the target's a 37. My previous year was a 19. This year I have a 34. I didn't meet the 37, so no, I don't get a 3.
Oh, so you're talking about the interim target for that year?
Correct.
Now, I thought you were talking about something in the future.
That's the long-term target.
Yeah, okay. That's what confusing. I'm thinking,
Yes.
well,
You got interim
you should get
targets
to that.
and you got
Okay.
long-term
All right,
targets.
that's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So also, just, and I'm not sure if I'm correct here, but so you could also be impacted negatively if you have a campus that performs really, really well, and they don't grow very much because they're already kind of at the top of the.
If they continue to meet this,
Yes.
they will get a 3.
Okay.
So long as they continue to meet the target, even though I'm high, I could go backwards. But if I'm meeting the target, I'm still going to get a 3.
Still rewarded.
You're still
Okay.
rewarded.
Okay.
Other questions? So, got different rules for different levels. So for elementary and middle, I'm just going to jump to it. 50% of this is about growth. And truly and honestly, everyone in this room has heard me say to every campus, every leader, if we're not growing them, we're not going to end up impacting academic achievement. I started out by saying we were telling everyone we got to grow more, get the M&Ms up over the apples. Well, the only way you impact the M&Ms is if you grow them. So even though we already got 75% of our kids at approaches, okay, how are we going to move them from approaches to meets? And how are we going to move them from meets to masters? And that's where the progress monitoring system that we're helping our campus build within to really know that. And that's 50%. Well, then the next 30% come from academic achievement, and that's meets and masters. And domain 3, the federal government said, we don't want the approaches. We want meets and masters. So that's 30%. EL proficiency is that TELPAS that I talked about. That's 10%. And student achievement domain 1 score, that's 10%. So a couple things to note. If you don't get TELPAS, you've already knocked yourself out of getting an A. Because that means you have to be perfect everywhere else. And again, if I don't impact here, I'm not going to impact here. And then high school, 50% of it is academic achievement. Now understand here, this is really algebra, English 1, and English 2. Because this is only reading and math for meets and masters. Then the 30% comes from the CCMR that we had the conversation with Dr. Lee. And then we got 10 and 10.
Doctor, can you go
Yes,
back
sir.
one slide, please?
Yes, sir.
For the military ready, is it solely they sign a DD form for it? Is it?
Right now, TEA requirements is that we have documentation that they've completed a DD4 form. We have to then load that into the TEA system, and they give credit that way. Totally just DD4.
Okay, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Ms. Lamont Dickley, you?
I was just thinking, so the EL proficiency is always TELPAS, whether it's high school.
Yes.
or stuff.
And know that that's for many things that we've talked about, especially when we think high school, we're thinking just 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. But when it comes to TELPAS in elementary, we're back to kinder 1st, 2nd.
What does that 4-year grad rate comprise of? I know it's only 10% of women.
That's really how many of our students graduated within their 4-year cohort?
And you'll have that.
But you said we can use the 6-year.
That's in domain 1, only in domain 1.
Okay.
In domain 3, it's federal 4-year. So in domain 1, you can do 4, 5, or 6, but in domain 3, it's just federal 4-year. Which is looking at our cohort of kids who come in 9th grade, and did they graduate within 4 years? So now, a piece of accountability that really has not been discussed in many years is about distinctions. Now, this is outside of the A, B, C, D, F. This is a whole nother piece with a whole nother different set of criteria. And for distinctions, we're looking at your campus comparison group of 40. Now, I know many times we say, oh, we should compare this campus to this campus, but that's not how the state looks at it. It has to be similar type, size, grade span, and student demographics. So every campus gets their campus comparative 40. And here's the other crazy thing. I could possibly be in a campus comparative 40, and their comparative 40 may not include me. Make it make sense? I can't. Okay? But that's just the way the demographics fall. And here are the distinctions that campuses are available to get, but there's many criteria underneath each one of these on how you achieve that. The key is, remember, it's about your campus 40, so you have to fall in the top 10%, the quartile 1. So just for example, this is Kingwood's comparative 40 for 2024. Sorry, Creekwood. Okay? And you're going to see of Humboldt ISD campuses, the only campus that's in their comparative 40 is Riverwood. But you can see it's number 18. These are the ones that are the most comparative to Creekwood. So accountability over time. Nothing official as it relates to a A, B, C, D, or F has come out since 2022. So you're going to see here, these letters are official from 2022. What you see in 23 and 24, we have taken the TEA scaling tool that they provide for us and being able to take the data that they give us, and we have done unofficial projections. They give us all the numbers behind it, but they don't give us the actual A, B, C, D, or F. So me and my team literally take it and put that information within the TEA scaling tool and be able to do the comparison. And as we've already talked about, Dr. Brown's talked about, we have seen some decreases across. There are some places that we've been stable the last 2 years, but know that collectively, everyone in this room, along with principals and instructional coaches, we've had much discussion about this. When I blew in last year in August, that's one of the first things I did, was I brought principals to the table to help them ensure that they had a deep understanding of the system, what all the components are, and help them to understand their data. And then, of course, we didn't get official ratings. Well, guess what? We didn't wait until the state this year said we weren't going to get official ratings. Starting back in the spring, we started back the conversations again, just because it doesn't matter if we get the A, B, C, D, or F. We have the numbers, and these numbers represent students. So we got to get down to the teacher and student level and have conversations about where do we see strengths and where do we see areas of concerns, and pull back the layer of the onion and put plans in place to progress monitor to move forward. Also, I want you to note how our economically disadvantaged number has changed over time. This number is always based off of snapshot from October. So that's the last Friday of October is what TEA uses as our accountability economically disadvantaged percentage. So coming up in about 4 weeks, we'll get our new number for accountability 2025. And that plays a factor as well.
What is considered economically disadvantaged?
Students who are qualified for free and reduced lunch.
So one measure.
One measure. So, Dr. Lee?
Thank you. Good morning again. So we wanted to highlight just real quick, again, we're happy to come back and do a deeper dive into this, but some of the things that we put in place last year to improve our CCMR indicators, which is a lagging indicator again. So what you're looking at right now is class of 2023. We don't yet have everything for class of 2024 because there are still things that they can put into place. But last year we implemented, so the TSIA short version is a requirement in Texas to take any dual credit classes or to go to college essentially. Students can sub that now for SAT or ACT cut scores, but we need all of our students to take that TSI now because we don't have other options like PSAT that we used to have or other ways for them to qualify for college courses. We have now our CCMR goals and checklists. Last year we started in our individualized personalized counseling meetings. We mentioned the DD4 forms we can now collect and put in. We've added dual enrollment government. Spanish 1 has been added to our dual credit summer academy, and we increased significantly our industry-based certifications in our CTE classes for the 23-24 school year. In addition to all that, what we're putting in place this year, instead of just doing TSI on Saturdays, we're implementing that in the school day for any of our sophomores at the end of the year, because that's when they will have hopefully had enough math instruction to be successful on that. We were adding in Texas College Bridge, which is a TEA-approved option for us for them to qualify for college courses and get them so they don't have to take any remedial courses when they get to college. And then we are working on standardizing our industry-based certifications for certain courses across the board. So that's just going to be a requirement for those courses. And then we have some more things coming in the future to talk about as well. Yes, sir.
One, thanks for all of this data, the team.
That's all Dr. Wilson Rogers.
That's a lot of crunching data. I know one, I'm always, as you all know from the time I've been here, I'm really supportive of counselors. So we have roughly, 48,000 kids in the district, right? So when we say personalized counseling, are we literally, how would we, personalized counseling, are we saying that we're meeting with every single student? And if so, how is that physically possible with, 30, 40, how many counselors do we have, right?
About 120-ish.
How do we literally give personalized counseling? Now, I know we're using, y'all have some really smart people utilizing data to really show the progress, which is what I've really liked, right? Individual personalized counseling, that's what Robert really helped me understand coming onto the board. But are we really able to actually sit with each person, or are we working towards those that really have some challenges? How are we doing that with just a limited amount of, again, 150 scattered across 48,000 students? That's, I don't know how personalized we can get.
So the first answer is because they are rock stars. The second answer is because we have put several measures in place over the last 4 to 5 years to take all non-counseling duties off of our counselors' plates. The first thing we did several years ago was hire 504 specialists directly under Mr. Phipps's department, so that was no longer a duty taking time away from counselors. So to answer your question, yes, our Rockstar counselors do meet individually with every single student. At the elementary, they get 1 meeting per year with their counselor. At the secondary level, they get 1 in the fall and 1 in the spring, and we do track that data so we know exactly the numbers every campus has and that those are being met. At the secondary level, they implemented specific CCMR checklists where the kids literally take those indicators you just saw, sit there with their counselor and figure out what check marks can I put on here, and if I don't have a check mark, what's my goal to achieve one before the end of high school?
So let me ask this, because I know the guidelines for 504 have changed, so I would ask Mr. Phipps, do you have enough specialists, right? Because I know there's been an increase there. What is your take? Do we need to be looking at more funding? I know, that's
Always more funding.
Well,
question, right?
Mr. Sitton is correct. I always want more funding. And Terry was like, what is Henry going to say? Currently, right now, we do have enough staff. During the budget process, we submitted requests. Some were approved, some were not, of course. But everything that we need at this time has been addressed, and we have enough staff. I'll come back later if I change my mind. But
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, Ms. Lamont Dixon.
I was going to ask, at some point, can we also get a list, like our ranking, and I would just say Region 4 or whatever is easier, on how we rank test-wise compared to other districts in the categories, like for economically disadvantaged students, for African American and Hispanic students, since that was the category up here for those
Are
two
you wanting
areas.
that testing for
And
state
SPED.
testing or for the college testing?
I think both, because it shows us where those gaps are. And the only reason I was on the superintendent, I don't know, of the year committee or whatever, and Galena Park ISD, literally that's one of the things they brought into the interview, that they were number 1 in all of those categories. I mean, it only showed like the top 5, but I don't recall seeing Humble on that list. But I would like to kind of know where we are in all of these categories on educating this group of students, whether it's economically disadvantaged, African American, Hispanic, and SPED, compared to our surrounding districts.
Because the data is released, we could go and pull the surrounding districts and make a chart based on the data tables that are available from TEA. That's no problem.
Okay.
But it's just going in and manually doing that. The state doesn't put that out in just a nice spreadsheet form, but the data is available within TEA, so we are more than welcome if you give Dr. Brown some suggestions of some districts around us that you would want us to see. We'll be more than glad to create a spreadsheet with that comparable information for CCMR.
Yeah, I think it'll be good to do the surrounding districts and even compare us to the state average. So when you take a economically disadvantaged, well, how do we compare economically disadvantaged with the state average on that
Right.
as well?
Okay.
So I think that'll be good. Yeah, we'll work on that.
Thank you.
I think, Dr. Wilt, yeah. On the comparison you gave for the campus comparisons, right? It said that's their group of 40.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right, so for the distinctions, talking about that. So is there any way to know, like, how, like, just say that the first 10 in that group versus Creekwood, based on the 24 information, 2023-24 information?
I would have to go and, thank you, sir. I would have to go and pull each one of those individually from TEA
And you can see if they were awarded
and see.
distinctions for it?
Well, nobody's getting distinctions right now.
Okay, not at all.
Not at all. Nobody has. That's a part of the legal legislation as well. Is no distinctions has come out since 2022. So we don't have distinctions for 2023 or 2024. What we could go and see right now is just component scores, because remember, that's all that's been released. It's
Yeah,
component scores for each one of those. That's not going to necessarily tell us if they have an A, B, C, D, or F, but it could just be Creekwood got this as a component score. This is what these other.
Well, no, you already got that for the, I'm not asking that, and that's fine if we don't, I would just like to know, because looking the last time they actually awarded distinctions, we really had seemed to drop down the.
Yeah, I would have to go and pull for each one of those, the distinctions for each one of those from 2022.
Yeah, but that's old. That's
Yes.
that's not useful. Okay,
Yes.
that's what I wanted to know. So we can't really get that information until those lawsuits go through
Exactly.
the court. And
Correct.
And that would be true for everybody. So
For
there's
everybody.
but I just think that. And then just on the other chart here, so you can read this as where you had all the grade levels by campus.
Oh, yes, sir.
It's not up there. They're just like approaches. So we're basically saying Toscada Springs, 87% third graders approached grade level.
Correct.
Right. And obviously, in that 87% are the group that meets in masters.
Yes, sir.
Right. So it's all, and when approaches, if you help me with my brain think of in terms of a grade, where's a cut for approaches versus
It is
meets?
different for each grade level and each content.
Okay.
So what is approaches for
course.
third grade? Of course, Mr. Scarfo. Come on, it's TEA. So what is approaches for third grade reading is not necessarily the same for fourth grade reading, not the same for fifth grade reading. What's meets, masters, it's literally a performance standards chart.
Good, I get you. That's
Yes,
fine.
and I'll be
I'm not
glad to share that
surprised,
with
but,
Dr. Brown to share with you all.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Others. Okay.
Dr. Wilson Rogers, but approaches, I think people think of approaches as, well, they passed.
Approaches
Regardless of grade level.
Regardless of grade level, in TEA's world, approaches performance level is they passed. Now that level,
Whatever
that
those cut scores are
that
year?
cut scores are,
Okay.
many of us, including myself, would probably not think of that percentage as a passing percentage, but based on TEA's criteria, that's what they put as passing of the STAR and EOC assessment.
Okay.
So, systems and structures of support to help with student learning and growth. As I said, I came in August of 2023. We really sat down in October and really had conversations with campuses about the accountability system, changes and updates to it. Then we also implemented these campus accountability plans that really helped us lay a foundation and provide a common language and a systematic approach to student achievement, looking at domain 1, 2, and 3 for foundations of where are you as a campus. We can talk holistically as Humboldt ISD, but each one of our campuses need to look at their own individual information, determine strengths, areas of concerns, and then determine what were some instructional goals that you were going to work on, what are your student groups that you need to focus and be progress monitoring, and then what are action steps throughout the year. So we made that plan into 4 cycles, took the year and put it in cycles and talked about, okay, what are you going to do from August to October and November to January, and really, really look at, are you making progress towards your goal? Then, like I said earlier, starting this spring, to even put more emphasis on the work, we talked about a 5 systems of effective schools framework that's part of research-based strategies and approaches, and really then even added that layer to our campus accountability plans. Looked at our SIPs as well and added some commonality there so that principals didn't feel like their things were disjointed and that we really could figure out what the system was. Tiered campus support. based on information that we were gathering about the data coming in June, we were like, okay, there's some places that we just need to ensure that we're visiting them and giving them support at a deeper level. And then other places, not as much, is not as often, but everybody gets to get seen and everybody gets to visit and ask us for that level of support. And then also providing just resources and strategies to instructional coaches and our teachers through professional learning opportunities to help with the work of their campuses. So in your folder, you're going to have a longer document that is our campus accountability plans. You're going to be able to see what we are having our campuses to complete. Once we go out for their first round of campus accountability meetings, then 10 days after they submit those to us, and as a team, we review them, give them feedback, and then we continue to progress monitor. So just like we're having them to progress monitor the work on their campus, from a district level, we're looking at it as well and progress monitoring and handing them feedback. The first page is just the foundations page that's having them take a deeper look into their accountability system. The second page you're going to see is their student data tab that's giving a high level overview in those 3 cycles of where they are performing and where they know they need to get to for Accountability 2025. And then the last page we gave you is just an example of one of the cycles of them providing us information on what their goal is and what are their actions and steps for the first 90 days. And then we have them reflect on that and say, okay, what do you need to tweak, move to the next cycle, do some more work on. Our assistant superintendents are a part of that. Teaching and learning is a part of that. We're all in it together, having much conversations and helping our campuses just navigate this and do what's best for them. Everybody's not at the same place, and that's okay, but we do have to have a system in place to ensure that all kids are growing and learning. Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson-Rogers. And so I thought this was important to review, because you'll hear a lot about the accountability scores, and it seems simple when it's just A, B, C, D, or F, but there's a lot that goes into that, and this team out here knows that, and they're working with the campuses to do that. And so, Ms. Hayhurst, where are you? There we are. Okay. So campus improvement plans are due when?
10 days after their first round of campus accountability visits.
You asked about campus improvement plan.
Yep. So kind of walk us through the next steps.
And Ms. Eubanks, are you in the, yes, so you might also, September 30th? So there are two different pieces here. So the multiple page document that you have in your folder, that is the campus accountability plan. And I call that our living, breathing document. It is what we, teaching and learning, accountability, advanced academics, schools division, that we work with campuses. And so we are constantly keeping that in front of them. The campus improvement plan is an expectation from the state. And while it does capture our data, it is going to be what they submit at the end of September on the 30th. It will have a STAR-focused goal as directed by Mr. Perkins and the assistant superintendents, as well as other expectations that the state has as it pertains to safety, bullying, teacher retention. I mean, there's just a host of things that go in the campus improvement plan, all very important, but we wanted to make sure that with accountability that we pulled it out so that as we're providing this tiered support, that's what's in front of us. So September 30th is for the campus improvement plans, but the campus accountability, we are meeting with our most tiered campuses at least 3, if not 4 scheduled times, and then that doesn't include how many times they pick up the phone and say, I need. And then you can fill in the blank.
So walk through the semester, though, what they're going to see. Is there a district plan?
Okay, so, and some of that has not been finalized. So, and I appreciate what you're saying. So let's talk a little bit about, we need to back up to the district improvement plan. And this is where we need your help and actually your guidance. So as it pertains to the district improvement plan, we have not set performance objectives in 3-4 years. And so I'm looking back at Kathy Eubanks because she and I worked together on this. And so I think that the first step that we're working with Dr. Brown, who will work with you, is we need direction from you about what is that performance objective. What is going to be that target? So you've been given our data, and the handout that Dr. Wilson Rogers just distributed is each campus as well as the district. That's going to help lead that conversation about where our performance objectives need to be. Once you've set that, then Kathy and I, along with other support, need to meet with the district decision-making committee, because they have, our process has been, they give feedback. They look at the data, they talk about the supports, and then they say, yes, no, what about, have you considered? And then we need to bring that back to the board for a final vote. Once that happens, then we have an established district improvement plan, and campuses then at that point may need to make some tweaks to their campus improvement plans. So this is all after the fact. So Kathy and I, this is not how we want to do this, but this is how we're going to do this. Meaning that our greatest hope is we can get ahead of this. Because quite frankly, principals set goals for their campus in April before the next year comes at that time. And so our greatest hope is we set those performance objectives, and then we can get in a cycle of reviewing those on a more regular basis, so that then principals know with plenty of time what is our target as a district, so that as a campus I can set my goal appropriately. We need to recognize that by not setting it until October, November, that the campuses are going to be able to do some work, but we all know that that train is in motion. And master schedule, hiring practices, things that really do determine the outcome of your campus, you can make tweaks, but for real, true procedural changes, you need time to make that to develop that. So, yes, ma'am.
And I was going to say, and I think you kind of answered it somewhat. So we have our board superintendent evaluation meeting in November.
Okay.
So to me, all of this is tied together.
Yes, ma'am.
So it sounds like it's possible for us to establish those expectations and pull it all together with whatever assessments or parameters or measurements, as Mr. Grabowski would like to say, by that November board meeting.
I think so, and so I'm going to, again, my eyes are going back to Ms. Eubanks because she's my memory right now. So our greatest hope is that in the month of October, I believe, correct, we would meet with, that you would set the initial, DDM would give feedback, you would set the final, so that campus improvement plans would go to the board in December.
Okay.
So I don't know how that then marks, but you would have, our greatest hope is that that final performance objective for the district would be in place by the end of October, November.
So it sounds like we need to meet earlier,
Well,
sooner rather than later.
That's,
I'm
we
just-
will
I'm
take,
just trying to
right,
understand.
we will,
Okay.
if we can, because
like it.
I think the other thing is, again, trying to organize 7 people obviously is a feat, and then on district decision-making, it's more than 7, and so trying to pull that together will also be, I want to give them as much advance notice as I can, so.
Question.
Yes, sir.
And this might not be for this, but something that I think the board also continues to explore. I know that I think you said it's been 4 to 5 years, right?
I know it was before COVID.
So it was before COVID. Question, just, there's degrees, right, that a person can get for curriculum writing, right, writing curriculum. Because where I'm going is that I know that we're a district that doesn't have a set curriculum for our teachers. Is that correct?
No, we have a set curriculum.
Okay, so
Yes,
what's
sir.
the curriculum then?
So, and I'm looking at Dr. Johnson, because if you
I'm
if you
just-
mind, we do have a curriculum, and we do have a scope and sequence. What I think has been our focus is the state really tells us what to teach. Those are in the standards. How you teach it is still up to teacher discretion. Now, the conversations that we're having and that campuses are having, so imagine again, so the data that Dr. Wilson Rogers shared is campus and district data, but she talked several times about progress monitoring. So I'm a classroom teacher. I'm a recovering high school English teacher, so forgive me. But so I would give a test. We, with my group of my freshman teachers, we would give a test. And then the expectation is that I need to look at the data and the results of that test. Which standards did my class do well? Which ones did they not? And then how am I going to cycle that back through? Because it's important that I want all children to have enough understanding of that standard to then move on to the next one, to move on to the next one. But in the past, we all could teach it differently. But here's reality. So if you and I are on the same team and my students bomb the test, but yours do really well, as a professional, I should be asking you, so Mr. Holmes, how did you teach that? What strategies did you use? I may be a new teacher, and so learning from an experienced teacher, I may have, you may have strategies, you may have structures, systems that I could learn from. And so that's where I'm really seeing a lot more discussion at the campus level, and I'm looking at my fellow coordinators and specialists. We are seeing a greater level of collaboration because no teacher gets up in the morning and says, I want to do a bad job. Nobody does that. All of us, we want to do our very best, and if my neighbor down the hall is performing better, then I want to know what she's doing. And we're seeing those conversations, we're hearing those conversations as we provide support. So yes, there is a curriculum that is given to us from the state that is then taken at the district and pushed out to the campuses. How you teach is your call. Because kids are different, right?
Ms. Ayers, are we looking at incorporating the new TEA curriculums where that they're making available to all districts? You don't have to use them, but it provides all the lesson plans and everything else.
Okay.
And,
So,
because that sound, I mean, on the face of it, that sounds great because now you don't have to, create the wheel, but maybe it's not. I just asking.
I think that's a very good question, and that's something that, again, I'm looking at Kathy. So that's part of House Bill 1605, and so they are in the beginning phases of that. And so, for example, I'll speak Lisa McCorkadell, who is my other half with secondary. We've had conversations with the coordinators to talk about that curriculum. Because it's in its infancy stages, what we're seeing is a lot of worksheets, and that's not how we teach kids. And so my hope is that as our vendors get better at hitting the state's rubric, because they have a rubric, so as our vendors get better, then we'll see higher quality materials. I am not opposed, Dr. Johnson is not opposed to, or any of our directors, any resources that we can pull from, especially because there's money attached to that, money that we get. I'm going to take that because, again, so 35 years ago when I started teaching, they handed me my teacher's edition and a curriculum guide and said, here are your keys, go have a good time. And so the more specificity that we can provide to teachers and they have that choice, then I think that that's in the best interest of kids, right? Because what we want is that every child has an excellent education, but we do know that that is dependent on what the teacher's bringing to the table. So if we want that equity to be seen across the district, then the better the resources are, the better for the kids. But as of right now, our coordinators had looked at, and they have not necessarily seen something. Yes, sir.
Is there, I love hearing you say give the teachers the autonomy to teach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have your strengths in teaching. Your other high school English teachers have their strengths, two different styles, both effective. Are the teachers, and this is the gripe I hear a lot, my wife is a teacher, you may know, may not know, about the lesson plans they're told to create, but then they often deviate from because the class asks a question and the class takes a different route, and my wife basically will go back and her friends review what she was supposed to cover. But the amount of time spent to create, it's often not what happens, if ever, in the dynamics of a teacher teaching a classroom. Have you?
So I want to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. So as I'm a teacher, I've created a lesson plan, right? But because of where my kids are in the learning, that lesson plan that I've created may or may not reflect where they are in their learning, and I'm having to deviate from that.
Well, you'll deviate from the plan because a student will ask you a question, and you go, that's a great question.
Sure.
And you'll go off course because you want to engage that mind.
Sure.
And so their request of me is, I don't know who's in charge of creating their lesson plan. They are, but who requires that is, can you simplify that process for the teacher to allow them to have the autonomy that you're talking about? Because that will really be something they appreciate.
No, thank you. Thanks, sir. I appreciate the question. We actually have worked on that. We actually started it during COVID, because when we moved to virtual, a lot of people weren't used to teaching virtually. And so we put what we called what did we call them? Learning sets. I was thinking of this one. They always help me. It's a team effort here. Learning sets, and teachers really appreciated them. But what it was a framework. You could use it, but you also could adapt it for your students. We found, because of the large number of teachers we have every year, that what we need to do is provide a framework. And these ladies all back here can talk even in more detail. We'd love to come back and even show you some. But there's a framework for it, so I can use it if I want to, but I can adapt it. So there's actual lesson plans in there that they can pull from. And so your question makes me wonder if everybody knows about them. So that's a great question.
I'm right there with Mr. Grabowski.
Because in math, and Rachel's back here, Rachel Smith, and Katie Hathorn and Lucretia Goff are back here. They've spent a lot of time. In fact, we bring in teachers to help write them. And so they've spent a lot of time on them. But again, it really has the non-negotiables that are tied to the TEKS. And they also pull in specific resources you can use and activities. So again, as a new teacher, I could take and use them as they are. But as a veteran teacher who really knows their kids, I can make those adaptations. But we'd love to come back and show them to you.
Yeah,
Is your proposal almost, my mind is going this direction, you can issue to the teachers the rough, like a bullet point, here's the TEKS that are covered in this lesson, and the teachers could almost get away from creating lesson plans? What is that called, Doctor?
Well, we call them, it's just a curriculum, but there's actual samples of all of those and all of those new ones that we're putting out.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's really out there.
Well, we need to do a better job of communicating, don't we?
I'm not trying to point a finger.
No, I'm
trying to motivate
glad
the
you're bringing
teachers.
it up.
This is
No,
one thing
thank
they
you.
really complain about.
That's one we can easily fix.
That's awesome.
And I was just going to piggyback on what Mr. Grabowski and Mr. Holmes brought up earlier. I know Mr. Holmes and I have talked about this a little bit over a year ago, actually now. It does seem like there are teachers that don't believe we have, like the teachers that need like step by step, you need to do this every day, these are your lessons kind of teachers. And the ones that the autonomy teachers, I'm not talking about. That's kind of how my brain works when I teach. But there are teachers that we've heard from that feel like there's not a set curriculum that they can just look at, open up every day and follow a lesson plan. So I think there's different levels. Agreed. But I think that communication is probably important, because I've heard that a lot from different campuses.
And that was really the point of that legislation. And from everything you read about it, it's, oh, well, here, you got it. But what Ms. Hayers just said is, well, it's not really what they're selling it to be, because it's not the kind of lesson plan we might want to have for classroom teachers to follow. So there's really a disconnect there, because I'm telling you, if you read about it, they make it like, well, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and boom, you just got it. All you got to do is it's free.
But I want to add too, and so just a kind of a side note. So one of the vendors that we have used from time to time has been HMH, and so HMH had and that's Holt, Hardcore.
They keep changing.
Anyway, they keep changing names. Anyway, it is a vendor that we have used, and I know with ELA we used it frequently. But they submitted their first proposal and it was rejected because it didn't hit the state's rubric. Now, do I know, based on prior experience, that HMH has traditionally provided high quality materials? Yes. So they have gone back to the drawing board now to say, how are we meeting the state's rubric? Because what has happened is, and all of you recognize, all of the vendors don't live in the state of Texas, right? And so they are, in the past, they may put the teaks on the front cover, but when they created those resources, it wasn't necessarily with our standards in mind. And so when you look at the state's rubric, it has very high expectations. And so I think it was probably surprising to HMH that they were rejected, but they'll go back, they'll make their modifications, and they'll resubmit. And so honestly, Mr. Scarfo, I can't say enough. I'm expecting, because we are in the infancy of 1605, to see higher quality, because that's how vendors make their money, and they want to make money. Now, Lisa, Ms. McCorkadale reminded me, so we have viewed, and there is a resource for secondary math that we are going to purchase, obviously, or ask for approval to purchase. It will come to you, but our hope is that we see a lot more of opportunities for us to put resources in our teachers' hands. So,
but would we ever consider just creating our own? I mean, I think that's what Mr. Holmes is kind of alluding to, right? When you said there, you can get a degree in curriculum writing and all of that. Just along the way, have we thought about writing any curriculum for Humble ISD?
We do have, and so I'll speak from a secondary perspective. So we have, for example, I'll use secondary ELA. So Dr. Holt has brought in started with instructional coaches and then went to team leads, and they come in and they create curriculum. They start with the units and then develop those out. I think that, again, where that autonomy is, you're talking about a very extensive process to do for those of us. I mean, you can imagine, and being married to a teacher, you realize that takes time. And so I would say we have a framework, we have the high points. It's what then activities go with that, what text go with that. Those take time. And so while we have some of that, is it as extensive as a bullet by bullet? It isn't yet, but
Elementary is.
So, okay.
Elementary is very detailed. And in fact, that's one of the reasons we bring the teachers in, because we want teachers to really have materials that they feel comfortable using. And we in fact, coming off the summer, we had curriculum writing. But they have worked hard over the last couple of years to really get detailed curriculum in both elementary ELA and in math. And this year we've added integrated. We've added integrated science with literacy and integrated social studies with literacy, because it's hard for our elementary teachers to find time to teach social studies and science. But we can pull from those informational texts where you can actually teach the science, but you're teaching literacy skills while you're doing it. So we're in the process of that. But I'm glad you're bringing this up, because that gives us more information to help do a better marketing job and helping with that. The other thing is, in the portal, in the Humble portal, the learning sets from COVID are actually still in there. And we've used those sometimes with our apprentice teachers who just do not have that much experience. And so they were so popular, that's why we've expanded, and we've really worked on adding and updating those through the process these ladies have used.
What else?
Just lumping it all together in my mind, how if we want to work on STAR, which we all do, if we had as a big picture, whatever group, create the bullet point lesson plans based on TEKS that the teachers are to cover, distributed to all the teachers, let them use their autonomy, I cannot see how that would not be a turnaround in a successful manner, just the way Mike Grabowski sees it.
Well, and part of that already exists in the curriculum, or in the curriculum we've had. That's where we keep going back and adjusting. But because they get into the level that the TEK is actually assessed. Because you can have a TEK, but you've really got to look at the level of expectation. And sometimes that's what's missing. And so as they've worked on curriculum, that's one of the things they've been deliberately integrating in.
And I think that would be really beneficial, especially for the newer teacher who doesn't have all the experience to draw upon that your group does.
Right.
That I love where you're headed if you're headed that way.
I want to add one thing,
We're
because
in
I think Mr. Grabowski, and your point is very valid, and I just want to tell a very short story, and then so we have new science TEKs, okay, elementary, middle, and high, and it's been very interesting. So as Lori Jack, our elementary science coordinator, and Alyssa Griffin, our secondary, are working with campuses. And so I want to share a little story, and I'm not going to give away the campus, but she was doing some work on the campus to unpack the TEKs. That's kind of our phrase for making sure that we understand really what the state is expecting. They write things, they're very long. If you've looked at the standards, they're very lengthy. And so the campus that she was working on, they were unpacking the TEKs, and the teacher said, "Oh, I have got some great activities that would go very well with this standard." And Ms. Griffin said, "Okay, let's hold on to that. Let's finish unpacking, and then let's see." And so as they got to the end of the standard, because a lot of times the way that the state has them created, the punch is at the end, meaning that suddenly you get to the end of the standard and you realize it's about evaluation, it's about synthesis, it's about application and not definition or information. And so as the teachers working with Alyssa really looked at the standard and the expectation, they realized, oh, that activity is not going to get me there, that I'm going to need to do something that is of higher level. And so for us, recognizing, and this has been powerful with the new standards because everybody is a little bit inexperienced, right? We're getting new material. But I think that, and again, I'm going to say recovering high school English teacher. So what we're finding in the conversations at the secondary level, very much so, and probably even some at elementary, is that looking at those standards with fresh eyes is never a bad idea, because what we assume it's asking, we're off the mark. And sometimes you can be off the mark just a little bit, and it doesn't take it to the level that you need. The other thing that has been extremely powerful for teachers is not only unpacking the standard, but then seeing how it was asked on the state assessment. Because putting those two pieces together really helps them to unlock what it is the state is going to be testing. And from my perspective, doing that work, the standard with the assessment, is helping us provide equity across the district, so that every child, that we're hitting that mark and not where we think it is or where we would like it to be, or like in science where it has been in the past. And so that's a process. And yeah, it's powerful work. It really is.
Look back and see how you matched up when you get your results.
Yes, absolutely, they do. And so, exactly. And in fact, I was at a CAT meeting yesterday at an elementary campus. I was so proud of myself. Such good conversations. But that is exactly when they go and review that data and they dig into it. That is saying, oh my goodness, we hit the mark here, but we didn't here. So now how am I going, especially if it, and again, here's another word we throw around, if it's a high focus standard, meaning it's tested often, it has impact with the others. If it's high focus, then I had better make sure I'm cycling that back through. Because again, I recognize the importance of this. We all do. It's about perception. But Sharita, Dr. Brown, Dr. Johnson, all of these people at the table, all of these people behind you, and you, there are kids attached to those numbers. And if we're not hitting the standard, yeah, they may be missing the question on the test, but they didn't learn what they needed to learn, what the state expects them to learn, and we're responsible for that. And the conversation I had with principals yesterday is it's almost educational malpractice if we don't do and teach at the level that we know we need to. So while those scores may be reflective of one thing, at the end of the day, it's about what are we supposed to be teaching? how well are we doing, and then how do we continue to come back around, because once they get out of elementary, it gets harder and harder. So, yes, sir.
This is more of a question or comment for Dr. Brown, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this when we get into superintendent evaluation, but I was at Aldine High School in the 90s when the board mandated increased test scores. And what filtered down to the campus level was, we're going to teach you how to take the test. And we didn't teach our coursework. We were teaching how to take a test. The attrition rate over a 4-year period, they lost over 50% of their administrators and almost 40% of their teaching staff. They had almost a huge turnover. So while I'm all for having the state assessment as a component, it's not the end-all be-all, and that's the direction that we've been going in for 20 years. And I want to make sure that teachers are still going to be allowed to teach and reach those kids in their unique situation. And we're not going to get so caught up in how to answer question A, B, and C that they're not understanding the real-life aspects of what's being taught to them. That's just more of a comment than anything. So right now, if you're inheriting a superintendent evaluation grid, there's not a component there that we all need to discuss, but I want us to be very careful that we're not going so overboard on one comprehensive test per year that we're forgetting all the other great stuff that y'all been talking about. Does that make sense? So something for you to think about.
Sure, and that goes back to that comment, STAR's not everything, but it's something. So it is one measurement, and it's what the state has set up to measure schools and school districts by, and that's what they're going to publish. So for us to completely ignore it, it's not appropriate. But at the same time, I agree. We don't want, and Mr. Perkins and the assistant soups, that's not when they work, and this team out here, when they work with teachers, it's not do these worksheets and only these worksheets because that'll teach you how to pass STAR. That's not it. But we do need to understand how the STAR score is based. And are we doing things in our classroom so that kids can be successful when they take the test? So if there's items on that test, like you got to drag and drop this because it's all on the computer now. Well, if I never practice that with my kids, then they get to that STAR and it's like I didn't set them up for success. So there's things we've got to do to help our teachers be successful and our students be successful when it comes to that.
Thank you.
I'd say, though, I mean, it's not just something. It's not just a thing, a one data point. It's pretty critical because that's how we're judged in terms of the outside, because that's what the state, we can advocate for the state to change that methodology, how the test is built, and I'm all for that because I think there's certainly flaws in it, but we still have to be cognizant of that. It's a big picture, it's really, people are shining a light on that. You made the mention of the real estate groups, and
right.
And they are,
Chamber?
because it's easy for people to know what an A, B, C, D, even though they don't know what goes into those things. All they know is, well, in my mind, it's this. So we do have to be concerned about how we do it, and everything needs to, where we're pushing in the classroom, as we said, there's different components, and people need to understand how do you make improvements, because you can improve the pieces, like we were talking about with the
and that's why
CCMR, right?
That's why Dr. Wilson Rogers goes over this with the principals, and then they go out and work with this team goes out and works with the principals and the staff, because they know what goes into it. Right. You're right. The guy at the coffee shop doesn't know what goes into it. He just knows what the ABC is.
And all I was getting to is I think it needs to be important to people that this is a big deal, and not that, well, it's just one thing and it's just one data point, and we can. That attitude has to kind of go away in my mind, because it has to be important.
And we're emphasizing the something, but at the same time, we don't want to lose I get it. The mental aspects and all that else that goes in with working with students that.
Right. But all those things should feed to it anyway.
Right.
But you need to have the team, if you will, focused on, hey, this is important. It's not just a one data point thing and we can kind of blow past it. No, we can't. We can't talk it away. We have to deal with it. That's all.
And so I would say to Mr. Perkins and the assistant soups, do you feel like that's been accomplished at the beginning of this year, that it's been an emphasis? Yep. It's something we have to pay attention to and we have to work on, because when you look at that, nobody, it's like take the football coach analysis. Last, 1 year I was 10-1, then I went 9-3, and now I'm 8-4, and people are going to start asking, well, what's going on? And that's kind of where we are, and so we've got to address that.
But also, you said advocating for change. We did leave the lawsuit, so it almost seems like we're okay with the way the standard is. So, I mean, I'm just saying with TEA, I think that was kind of saying, here's Humble ISD, and we don't think the way you're addressing the scores with school districts is the proper way. I mean, so yes, we can have conversations, we can go talk to the legislature and all of those things, but that's kind of, the point of advocating, to say we don't think this is, we're not being judged fairly in the process.
Okay, I think you have one thing and then we'll wrap up.
Before our discussion, I handed a document to you. Originally, I gave you just the district's data over time, but I also wanted you to have the campus's accountability rating over time. But just the things to note. First and foremost, remember, Accountability 2022 is the last time we got official ratings. So that's the last time we got the official A, B, C, D, F, and the numbers. What you have on this document for 2023 and 2024 is, again, us applying the TEA scaling tool. So you're going to see I use words like unofficial and projections there, because that's work that our teams did. But again, like you're having this conversation right now, I am one to not have our campus be caught off guard. I want them to be informed about the reality of where they are. And you see, I just continue to say student learning and growth, right? How we take care of STAR, how we take care of accountability is we're ensuring that we're progress monitoring student learning and growth at the depth and complexity of the standards. So no, we're not about to go, teach to a worksheet or teach to a test. But as I'm talking to campuses, as all of us are talking to campuses, we're asking them about, how are you ensuring that kids are learning at the depth and complexity of standards? How do we show that Sharita Wilson-Rogers is growing where she's going? How do we know that she's learned that TEK at the level of mastery of the rigor of the standards? And if that doesn't happen, then we're not going to increase our meets and masters, our kids are not going to grow, and these numbers won't change. So those are the conversations that we're having. Wanted you to have all the information. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I will get to come back to you, because as things become more official, I am going to have to present to you the official ratings, but I'm also going to have to present to you if we have any campuses that have a label or have any issues and have to do some improvement required work from TEA. I do have to present that information to you. So probably come again later in this winter time, that I'll probably be back in front of you with specific information from TEA as it relates to those specific campus and the work that we have to do as a district. Thank you for, yes sir, Mr.
Just
Simon.
real quick clarification. When I'm looking at these dates, like the 2024 accountability.
Yes, sir.
Is that based on the 22-23 school year or the 23-24 school year?
For STAR, it's based on the 23-24 STAR. But as you're looking at graduation rate and CCMR, you're looking at the class of 2023.
Okay.
Of course. Makes perfect sense.
I've got one question.
Yes, sir.
Ross Sterling what's the asterisk for?
The asterisk is for, we have three of those domains that are a D. So we need to know, based on the rules, are they going to end up being forced to be an F? So that's another part of the legalese, and I put the asterisk just there. So y'all to know that some of the backwards things that I didn't talk to y'all about, behind the scene things, is if you get 3 out of the 4 domains, even though it's a 3-domain system, y'all know domain 2 has 2 pieces. So if you get 3 out of 4 with D's and F's, then they can make you a force D or a force F. And that's part of the rules, but we won't know that until the official ratings come out. And then what is going to be, they call it the intervention for that, right? also know that I talked to you about in Domain 3, there's state accountability and federal accountability. Federal accountability has released, and some of our campuses have a federal label. We're waiting for more information based on what will those campuses have to do for those as intervention work, what has to be turned into TA, what just has to be shared with you all. So know that that's why I will probably have to come back to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you share in an email or at a future meeting which campuses were federally designated?
Absolutely. So I will have to.
How many do we know right offhand? Rough number.
Rough number. I'm doing the math in my head. Hold on. I want to say 8, Mr. Holmes.
Okay.
I want to say 5 elementary and 3 middle schools. As off the top of my head, but I'll make sure to send that information to Dr. Brown to share with you all. And what I'm waiting on is by when do I need to get you all that information? And then we know one of those campuses, we know what they need to do, but for the others, we're waiting for further clarification. I don't want to have to keep coming back to y'all multiple times.
Sure.
I'd rather be able to come to you one time with that information. Other questions? Thank y'all for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Moving on to our closing items, are there any topics for future board business? Well, I want to thank everybody for coming so early in the morning, and I want to apologize for our delay back there, but we appreciate you, and thank you so much. And with that, the time is now 9:54 a.m. This meeting is adjourned.